Darksiders 2 is the second installment of the Darksiders game series developed by Vigil Games and published by THQ in 2012. And the remastered Definitive edition I played for this video was developed by Gunfire Games and published by THQ Nordic in 2015. Despite being a sequel to the first game, Darksiders 2 does not move the story forward from where the first game ended, and is instead told as a parallel story of what the first game's protagonist, War's brother Death, was doing, while War was imprisoned for 100 years after the first game's prologue. And yeah, I have no idea where I got the idea that War was imprisoned for 1,000 years in the previous video, when it was really just 100 years. That was a mistake I made when making the previous video, and this is me addressing it. Unlike the War Mastered edition for the first game, this remaster of the second game actually let me play with the controller, which was a good thing, because even on the normal difficulty there were tough enemies and bosses that would have been another saatanallinen työmaa to deal with the keyboard and mouse. Whereas the first game was more influenced by God of War and Devil May Cry as hack-and-slash action-adventure game, this second game was more influenced by Legend of Zelda and other RPG games that include item management and dungeon crawling. Not to mention this game is long. By the time I managed to defeat the final boss of the main story campaign, Steam informed me that I had been playing the game for 23.3 hours. Before we begin with the recap part of the video, where I cover the gameplay aspects when they become relevant to review, this game threw the biblical aspects out the window and added the third and fourth parties outside of heaven and hell. That means that the Horsemen of the Apocalypse are a bunch of separate races called Nephilim, and Death is not the Grim Reaper I expected him to be. The game begins with a similar opening narration as the first game did, in recapping what happened at the beginning of the previous game and why we are now in this situation. In short, the angels in their hubris decided to break the first 6 out of 7 seals to lure the demons into a trap, but ended up instead getting their asses handed to them, and now Earth is taken over by the forces of hell, and the humanity is extinct. Since the Horseman of War was on Earth while this happened, he ended up as the scapegoat for everything that happened, and now we play as his big brother, the Horseman of Death, in trying to win the Big Brother of the Century award by clearing his little brother's name. Likely because he only has 2 brothers and a sister left after he killed all the others in the Nephilim race. In order to get Brother War released and his name cleared, Death swore to resurrect the humanity, but without knowing how to do that, he had to go ask for the DIY instructions from the Keeper of the Secrets in the Veil. That would be the Crowfather, whom Death had once trusted the souls of the Nephilim he slayed, but who would rather die fighting Death instead of helping him. Instead, he tells Death that War was set up by the Charred Council to have him go against the Destroyer ruling over Earth at the moment eventually, to which Death responds by wanting to undo what War was accused of.
But they can help me to erase the crime.
Bring mankind back from extinction. Madness.
If it's madness, then who better to show me the way?
Crowfather lets Death know that there is a way to do this that can only be learned from the Tree of Life, but he won't let Death go there without first taking away the burden of carrying the souls of the Nephilim in the amulet that Death had given to him. Death refuses, which leads to the game's first boss fight against the Crowfather, who takes the form of War as a form of that trope where you're meant to fight the protagonist of the first game, but not really. Or it could be a contrast to how War was stiffer and more relied on slower, hard-hitting attacks, so Death can win against that with faster psi attacks. After defeating Crowfather as War, Death does as he was asked by killing him, but Crowfather as the last act of defiance throws the amulet of Nephilim souls blown into Death's skin, and before dying, drags Death into the endless abyss that ultimately leads to the Forge Lands. AKA those parts of the Bible that were edited out during the Dark Middle Ages and forgotten by the time the Renaissance happened. Since no one has been paying attention to it and powered its existence with the same belief system, The Forge Lands was just barely getting along until the End War happened, and now it's running on life support while suffering from cancer. So naturally, once Death lands there, he is told that he is in the same sinking boat as the locals, who tell Death that he can help them by reaching the Tree of Life, because the way there is blocked by the corruption killing their world. Meaning that fighting it off on his way to his goal, Death can save this world and everyone else who lives in it. In order to do that, Death is sent all around the Forge Lands to 3 different locations. A cauldron that he has to turn on to let the local blacksmiths return to their jobs at forging weapons. A water temple to cool down those forged artifacts. And foundry that houses a guardian that has not fallen to the corruption like many others. With this guardian brought to his side, Death can enter the 4th dungeon that houses a bigger guardian.
Must place the stone into the guardian.
We've seen its work, horseman. Corruption fair weeps from it.
The other 2 heartstones were pure. I'm wagering that their radiance will cleanse the 3rd.
Mayhaps.
Khan, the greater risk is to do nothing.
Aye.
That has unfortunately fallen to the corruption and is the boss that separates Death from the second act of the game story. It is quite a spectacle with an amazing musical score that I'm not sure if it was recycled from previous parts of the game. And it was more worth talking about than the previous end of the dungeon bosses. After defeating it and breaking it apart, the leader of the Makers rebuilds it now uncorrupted and makes it destroy the Eye of Corruption, blocking the way to the Tree of Life. But the game is not that short, as when arriving there, Death is confronted by the personification of the corruption.
Who are you?
I think you know. Once, you called me brother.
Absalom.
I have forsaken that name. Now, I am corruption.
Absalom, the last survivor of the Nephilim that Death never managed to kill, and has found his way to pay him back by not letting Death to the tree. Death is turned around, but instead of returning to the Forge Lands, he arrives to the Dead Plains, where he meets a merchant named Ostergoth, who tells him that instead of seeking the Tree of Life, Death should seek the Well of Souls. That is how he can really bring the humanity back, as their souls are channeled through there to the Dead Plains and to the living world. In order to reach the Well of Souls, Death should seek out the Lord of Bones, and so begins the annoying fetch quest part of the game. In order to reach the Dead King, you need to go to his ship, where the doorman tells Death that he can only get an audience by defeating the champion of the Gilded Arena. But in order to face the champion, Death has to summon him by going all around the arena to look for 3 Emerald Fangs. This boss is a challenge you can enjoy fighting, as it evolves first from a mini sandworm into a larger giant that you need to figure out a strategy to kill, mostly by weakening it, and then do a finishing move. What a sore loser! Oh, never mind. Cool finishing move. After defeating the champion, Death goes back to his gained audience with the Dead King, who says he will send Death to the Well of Souls, if he brings him his 3 lords who have gone AWOL. I had some trouble getting to the first one of them, so at the chat's suggestion, I decided to go instead kill the 3 out of 4 optional bosses for XP and loot. Prather was an easier version of Tiamat from the previous game, where the challenge came from the boss arena being this small. Corewood was like a mix of Swamp Thing and the Ents from Two Towers, and what better way is there to fight a tree than cutting it down? Timber! And the Deposed King is the hardest of the bunch, so much that you will be running and jumping around the boss arena like this was Dark Souls. After dealing with those optional bosses, it was back to fighting those 3 lords and tell them to get back to work. That order matched with the first lord, Pharisaer, who threw a hissy fit and Death has to fight him to make that lazy bum come with him. The second lord, the Judicator, claims that he has been working from home, which I can vouch from experience. The first seem like it's fun, but eventually you end up longing to get back to the office where you have 2 bigger computer screens. Meaning that the Judicator has been slacking off at work, and Death has to do 3 assignments in hurrying him up before he can come with him, and during that job we learn that liches look nothing like Whis from Konosuba. I should also mention that after those lords came with Death, they can be asked to do micromanaged errands around where you go. The final lord to track to the dead king was Basileus, who has isolated himself to the Psychomeron under the Gilded Arena, where Death by chance also gets to defeat the 4th and final optional boss, Echidna, which Basileus had been using as his steed. And then when bringing those 3 lords to the King of Bones, that guy decides to kill them for running away in the first place, before sending Death to the City of the Dead where the Well of Soul is located as thanks. In further gratitude, Death is also taught how to split his soul into 2 separate entities to enter that place. There Death has to fight H.P. Lovecraft-inspired boss called the Wailing Host, who has made a nest for itself in the Well of Souls. A stationary Cthulhu-looking boss who is blocking the Well of Souls and fights Death in a couple of intervals when not sending regular enemies at him. Defeating it and pulling it out of the Well of Souls releases the souls from their torment and brings Death face to face with Crowfather again, who seems to have mellowed from the beginning of the game in now being more at peace after dying.
Would you like to ask a question? Or just stand there like you've seen a ghost?
Tell me how to reach the Well of Souls.
The Well of Souls is a place of unimaginable power, the key to life and death, of creation itself. And that is why the well has a key of its own, one that was divided long ago. The angels keep one half, and the demons the other. And never shall the 2 meet.
Unfortunately, as we learn in the first game, the demon Straga is holding the Well of Souls as his personal power charger and keeps the humanity from being restored. There is, however, a way to use the souls of the Nephilim embedded to his chest to restore to humanity, if Death were to sacrifice them to the Well of Souls. At the Tree of Life, or the Tree of Death as it's called in the Dead Plains. Before going forward with any of that, I decided to cash in on that XP and loot for the optional bosses I killed. And then I went to the Tree of Life, which sent Death to what the Crowfather called the Lost Light, where Death has to find one of 2 keys needed to enter the Tree of Life. At the Lost Light, Death comes across corrupted angels hanging out there, and an uncorrupted angel who helps Death euthanize the corrupted angels. Angel Nathaniel asks Death to do a side quest back in the Kingdom of the Dead, which I was forced to do because I'll get to why in a bit. Climbing up the big tower called the Crystal Spire, Death comes across the Archon Lucian guarding the key he needs, but learns that it's taken to the Ivory Citadel by the scribe Yemareah. And to fight the corruption turning the angels hostile, Death needs to go pick up a weapon called Rod of Arafel from Earth. But before going to Earth, I had to go do the side quest Nathaniel gave to Death, because apparently this PC version I played has a bug that causes the game to crash if going to Earth with enough XP to level up from finishing this main story quest. This happened to me about 2 times before I went to ask the Dead King's Chancellor about Nathaniel's deceased friend to learn he had not passed the Kingdom of the Dead. And then in listening the quest instructions wrong, I ended up going to waste my time in this place, before reporting back to Nathaniel, who then sent Death to the Sage in the Forest Lands to ask if she knew where Nathaniel's friend had passed away to. I won't spoil who this friend was, but if you have played the first game, you should be able to guess who it was. Anyway, doing that side quest managed to get Death to level up before going to Earth, so the XP gained from finishing the side quest, and arrived to Earth to meet Uriel from the first game, who had been recast with a new voice actress.
Kill you for what your brother did here. But you saved my life. Consider us even.
What
This
do you
is
know
not the
about
same
Lord
voice
of
actress
Arafel?
for
A
Uriel.
weapon of immense power, brought to Earth by the Archon Hestus to battle the demons in the End War.
As Uriel is at that point in time where she still blames for causing the End War, she is not happy to see Death, but spares him of hostility because he arrived to help her Hellguard angels fight the demon ambush they were in. As she is also busy with her own affairs, Uriel also doesn't mind telling Death that the Rod of Arafel is on Earth, but it broke into 3 pieces during the early days of the End War, and just like War in the first game, Death has to go pick up those pieces. And looking for those pieces then turns this game into a third-person shooter like... well, not into a Call of Duty, so let's go with Spec Ops The Line. Death, welcome to Dubai. And it's a rather good thing that Death was given a divine shotgun and later a divine rifle to shoot at the waves of demons on his way to the pieces of the Rod of Arafel, because they are so many numbers. And also letting the captured angels out of their misery as he comes across them. After finding all 3 pieces, Death returns to the Archon Lucian at the Crystal Spire, who uses the Rod of Arafel to light the way to the corrupted Ivory Citadel where the Scribe resides, and Death gets to ride on an angelic beast to get there. This is a very big house to explore, so I'll just go over 3 noteworthy things here. Number 1. This is where Death finds a similar portal gun as ported at the tower in the first game. Number 2. The portal gun needs to be used to direct the light from the Rod of Arafel shot here with the mirrors to burn away the corruption. And number 3. The chat helped me find this Angel of Death set that got me the perk to make Death's health regenerate passively and when fighting with these sides. After working really hard to reach the Scribe Yamaera and beating him in a boss fight that I had some trouble to understand how to do the finishing attack, the Scribe tells Death that he does not have the key to the Tree of Life, and the Archon actually has had it this whole time.
The key. Mercy, horsemen! Where is it?
Please, I'll tell you everything. It was chaos. Even the most noble among us abandoned his senses and took up his sword. It happened to the Archon. It happened to me.
The Archon.
It was that damn pool. Their use was forbidden for a reason. Whatever vision he saw within rent his mind. The corruption spread from him. He made the city a slaughterhouse while professing his own purity. Eventually, the Archon fled to the Crystal Spire. He took the key with him.
Do you have any idea how long it took me to get here? Only to be told that I have been wasting my time. I had to do Nathaniel's side quest before going to Earth because of that stupid bug. I had to pay Spec Ops The Line on Earth looking for those pieces of the rod, and now you're telling me I was sent on a wild goose chase. Ui vittu! Without a break, Death goes back to the Archon for the next immediate boss fight to get the key, where that hubris-filled hypocrite uses the Rod of Arafel to fight against Death. For that we rip his wings off, to make him grow more demonic wings, to suit his high-stop Pasca persona, and throw that Paskian down to the void below, before taking that damn angel key. With that, Death returns to the Crowfather, who opens the way to the Shadow's Edge, or in other words, to Hell. Because what else does this place look like? Here Death once again comes across Ostega, who tells Death that the demon key he is looking for is in the hands of Samael. Unfortunately, when going to ask Samael, Death is brought face to face with his mother Lilith, who tells him what the players who played the first game should already know. Samael is imprisoned on Earth by the Destroyer for not siding with him, and so the demon key is lost with him. But then, Lilith gives Death's portal gun the ultimate Deus Ex Machina upgrade to use in going to meet Samael to get the key. a goddamn time machine, so he can go to the past and ask Samael to give it to him there. All Mother Lilith asks for her son in death in return is to resurrect the Nephilim instead of the humanity.
You are not my mother.
Using that time machine is not only vital in going to Samael, but also in making the way to Samael, as the corruption has also reached to block his way to the demon blowing his mom. Going into the past, Samael seems to be able to recognize that death is from the future, but instead of asking relevant questions about his status in the future, Samael decides to flex his I fucked your mom status by being the next boss fight. The boss fight against Samael is another hack and slash fight where you need to learn to recognize Samael's attack patterns through 3 stages, until Samael has had enough fun and just hands over the demon key to death.
Interesting. Perhaps you'll succeed after all. Either way, it will be quite a show.
Now having both keys in his possession, Death returns back to the Tree of Life, where he has to split his soul into 2 entities to use both keys to open his way inside, and face off against Absalom as the final boss of the game. And this final boss really earns that title by being tough, and also somewhat frustrating, as Absalom's attacks are both strong and far-reaching, which makes the fight long as Death has to keep running back and forth in doing damage and running away dodging Absalom's attacks. Absalom has 3 stages in his fight, the first one being somewhat on the level above Death in strength and speed in hitting like a truck, and the second stage makes Absalom bulk up to hit harder where Death has to jump around the boss arena. The third stage has Absalom lose his power-up, but compensate from it with area of effect attacks, the most frustrating of them being this unavoidable root attack where Death is trapped on one place where the player has to release him with button mashing before Absalom comes to deal an unfairly strong attack on him. And tough shit if you get trapped right next to Absalom while low on health without any health items. Eventually Death manages to chip Absalom's health down and heartlessly finishes the job he started eons ago in slaying his kin. Finally, Death has reached what he has been searching for the entire game at the Well of Souls and...
I've killed Absalom. Stopped the corruption. I stand at last at the Well of Souls, with no idea what I must do next.
With Death realizing that he was only looking forward to get the Big Brother of the Century award for clearing War's name, and so has no idea what to do next, Crowfather's ghost comes to tell Death to literally jump into the Well of Souls. And while he does that, either resurrect the humanity or the Nephilim.
But know that choosing one will forever doom the other.
My brother War. I would protect him above all.
To
Big
return
Brother
him
of the
to
Year
earth
award.
will require a sacrifice.
Having made his choice, Death hands his mask to the Crowfather and makes his jump. The game then ends by rehashing the ending of the first game in recapping how War slayed the Destroyer, Uriel broke the 7th seal, and how the other horsemen joined him in the cliffhanger that still to this day has not been carried over forward. The only difference is that the cutscene showing that is recreated with drawn visuals that might as well be called obscured concept art in showing the other horsemen in clearer detail than those different colored lights at the end of the previous game. There is also a post-credit scene showing that Death chose against Mother Lilith's wishes by restoring to humanity instead of the Nephilim, and her Dark Prince is going to punish her in ways that she won't be enjoying. This parallel sequel set during the events of the first game is mostly improved on the hack and slash elements where fighting as Death was more fluid than as War. Although that was balanced out with Death being somewhat heavier in jumping around and made more agile in climbing and landing in places where War couldn't. The fighting with different weapons was also another case of item management, of knowing when not to use certain scythes, hammers, glaives or gauntlets anymore. In the end, the chat suggested that I stick with the Chaos Reaper, as it levels up along with Death's level, and depending on the elemental foes, I tended to go with the elemental gauntlets, as that was the surest way of making enough damage fast enough. It also wasn't until I reached the Earth stage when I realized that the chat had been cringing at how poorly I had been upgrading the possessed weapons without realizing how to raise their critical damage. And even if I wasn't told by the chat, I would have likely noticed that the Death's Reaper form was nerfed to last less time than War's Chaos form in the first game, and it seemed to take much longer to recharge the damn meter for it. Among the Wrath abilities unlocked by leveling up and mapping onto the left shoulder button, I decided to go with the Harbinger list, and tended to mostly use the teleport slash because that tended to take health away from the enemies and give to Death. I also used the Harvest ability mostly for crowd control when surrounded by too many enemies, and really underutilized the Unstoppable ability, which I really should have been using more in the final boss against Absalom. And the Reaper's Thorn I did not even touch until I was going through the DLC campaigns. Compared to the main game, those DLC campaigns were a breeze to get through by being just barely over an hour long each. Argul's Tomb was maybe the longest in just exploring through the map and eventually fighting the boss, while the Abyssal Forge was more about collecting materials for an item that let Death walk on water to get to the campaign's boss. There was also a side quest in finding a weapon, but that got glitched somehow and I couldn't get that ball rolling anymore even when I restarted the game. The Demon Lord Belial was in another third-person shooter stage on Earth, where Death looked for survivors of humanity, but ultimately discovered that the lone survivor he had found had been fooled by the boss of the campaign to sell out his fellow humans, and that guy then asked to be killed off as penance. Speaking of the boss fight against Belial, because I had been using the auto-aimable shooting against small enemies, I had never actually used the aiming mechanic on the gun Death was given to by the makers on Forgelands, and failed to mention in the recap. So when I had to fight Belial and shoot at his weak spot during the transition to all three boss stages, guess how many times I ended up dying before relearning that trick late into the game? Overall, Darksiders 2 was a long game, and it was pretty much longer than it needed to be by the Deathblade stage. Before and after it, Death's goal was to get to the Tree of Life, but in order to reach the Well of Souls and before killing the Wailing Host, there was that frustratingly long fetch quest of getting through the damn Kingdom of the Dead. First, Death needed to see the Dead King, but in order to get an audience, he has to defeat the Gilded Arena Champion. But in order to face the champion, there were those 3 separate Emerald Fangs scattered around the arena. And then when getting to see the Dead King, he made Death go bring him his lords, and one of those 3 lords made Death bring him 3 separate souls from 3 separate directions. And then the Dead King just killed them as if to make the entire fetch quest entirely pointless to the plot progression. And speaking of the plot progression, remember that this second game was a parallel sequel to the first game, meaning that fuck all was gained from the ending of the first game, where this sequel then decided to skip over to in the epilogue scene before the credits. The third game is supposed to be another parallel story like this, but I have to my relief heard that it's much shorter than this and the first game, so I'll get to it when I decide it's time to return to the series after playing something else for a change. Darksiders 3 will likely be more set up for what comes after the first game's cliffhanger, which has still not been announced in the future 5th game. We'll see, and maybe when we see Death again, he will have more personality in it that goes further than just being the greatest big brother in the existence. Yeah, he had a simple goal in saving his brother War, but beyond that, his personality, when left idle to his own devices, did not offer much insight to how he came to slay all the other Nephilim, including Absalom, and chose to leave just those who became the other horsemen as the only survivors with him. That amulet that ended up getting stuck on his chest suggested that some regret over his actions, but not much to analyze. And I think I'm done now, as you can tell from my voice. Like the video, comment your thoughts down below, share this video for other people to see, and subscribe for other videos that I will have coming in the future. Also, ding the bell for a chance to chat with me when I have decided what game to stream playing next. And may your heart be your guiding key.